My mother used to say that a woman is born with nothing but the dirt under her fingernails and the sky above her head. The dirt is what you came from. The sky is what you can become. The trick, she'd whisper, her hands raw from scrubbing other people's toilets, was to never let the dirt swallow you whole. My name is Samantha Keller, and for the first 18 years of my life, the dirt was a single-wide trailer on the outskirts of Flint, Michigan. The sky was a scholarship to Columbia University. I got the sky. But let me tell you something they don't put in the glossy brochures. The sky has a class system, too. My father, Dale, was a line worker at the GM plant before it closed up and left Flint for dead. He took the buyout, a check that felt like a fortune and vanished like smoke. After that, he found God in a bottle of Jack Daniels and a recliner that slowly molded to the shape of his bitterness. My mother, Ellen, held us together. She cleaned houses for the doctors and lawyers in Grand Blanc, the wealthy suburb that glittered on the hills above our rusted-out town. She'd come home smelling of lemon polish and pine sol, her knuckles cracked and bleeding, and she'd still find the energy to make sure my homework was done. I had 2 younger sisters. The middle one, Chloe, was quiet, a ghost who learned early that invisibility was a form of safety. The youngest, Lily, was a firecracker, all sharp tongue and defiance. She was the one who'd scream at my father when he'd stumble in at 2 a.m., waking us up with the stench of stale beer. I was the fixer. I was the one who smoothed things over, who got the grades, who took the free lunches at school even though the other kids knew exactly what that brown paper bag meant. I clawed my way out. High school valedictorian. A full ride to Columbia. When the acceptance letter came, I didn't cry. I stared at it for a long time, at the crisp, cream-colored paper with the university's ornate seal, and I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. It wasn't joy. It was the sudden, terrifying realization that I had a chance, and if I failed, I'd fall right back into the dirt. New York was a different planet. I remember stepping out of Penn Station for the first time, my one duffel bag slung over my shoulder, and being assaulted by the noise, the smell of pretzels and exhaust fumes, the sheer velocity of the people. No one looked at anyone else. In Flint, everyone knew your business. Here, no one even knew you existed. Columbia was a kingdom of old stone and ivy, and I was an uninvited guest sneaking in through the servants' entrance. My classmates spoke in a language I had to learn. They talked about their gap years in Prague, their parents' summer homes in the Hamptons, the challenges of getting their trust funds structured. I talked about Flint. I learned quickly to stop talking about Flint. When I did, I'd get that look, a mixture of pity and revulsion, like I'd just described a particularly gruesome accident. I double majored in economics and political science. I worked 3 jobs, a research assistant for a professor who never remembered my name, a barista at a coffee shop in Morningside Heights, and a weekend shift at a bookstore. I was driven by a singular, burning ambition. I was going to be someone. Not just successful. Someone. I was going to build a wall of achievements so high, so unassailable, that no one would ever again be able to look down on me. Then I met Michael Harrington. Michael Harrington. The name itself sounded like it was carved from a block of New England money. He was a senior in the School of General Studies, but he carried himself with the lazy, entitled grace of someone who had never once had to worry about a tuition bill. He was tall, with sandy brown hair that fell over his forehead, a jawline that could cut glass, and the kind of confident, easy smile that made you want to trust him, even when every instinct screamed at you to run. I first saw him in a crowded lecture hall for a class called The Politics of Global Inequality. The irony was not lost on me. He was sitting in the front row, dressed in a casual navy sweater that probably cost more than my mother's monthly rent, and he was arguing with the professor. Not in an obnoxious way, but with a calm, intellectual certainty that made the room go silent. He was talking about meritocracy, about how the system, while flawed, ultimately rewarded talent and hard work. I raised my hand. I don't know what came over me. I was usually silent in class, preferring to observe. But something about his easy, unearned confidence ignited a fury in me that I'd been suppressing for 3 years. With all due respect, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands, That's a convenient argument for someone who started the race 10 yards ahead of the starting line. The professor's eyebrows shot up. Michael turned around, his eyes scanning the sea of faces until they landed on me. I was in the back, dressed in a plain gray sweater, my dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. He looked at me, really looked, for the first time. "I'm not saying it's a level playing field," he replied, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "But at a certain point, you have to take responsibility for your own trajectory. You can't blame your circumstances forever." "I'm not blaming," I shot back. "I'm stating a fact. It's easier to advocate for pulling yourself up by your bootstraps when you were born wearing designer boots. Some of us were born barefoot on broken glass." A few people in the class snickered. A few others looked uncomfortable. Michael didn't look away. His amused expression didn't falter, but something shifted in his gaze. It was no longer just curiosity. It was a spark of recognition. Or maybe it was a challenge. After class, I was walking out, head down, already mentally calculating how many hours I'd need to work that week to cover my upcoming textbook expenses, when a voice stopped me. Barefoot on broken glass. That's a hell of an image. It was him. Michael Harrington. He was leaning against the stone wall of the hallway, his hands in the pockets of his perfectly tailored trousers. "It wasn't meant to be poetic," I said, not slowing down. "It was meant to be accurate." He fell into step beside me. "I'm Michael." "I know. And you are." I stopped and turned to face him. Up close, his eyes were a startling shade of blue, like the sky on a clear, cold winter day. "Someone who doesn't have time for a debate on the virtues of rugged individualism," I said. "I have a shift at the coffee shop in 20 minutes. He didn't look offended. He just tilted his head, that infuriating smile still playing on his lips. "Let me buy you a coffee then. At your shop. I'll tip big." "I'm not going to be your poverty porn, Michael." For the first time, the smile faltered. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed his face. "Poverty porn? That's not what I meant. I just wanted to continue the conversation. You're the first person in 3 years in this place who said anything real." I stared at him for a long moment. My instinct was to walk away, to dismiss him as another rich kid playing at being woke. But there was something in his voice, a raw earnestness that cut through my defenses. Maybe it was because I was tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of being silent, tired of being the diversity admit that everyone whispered about. "Fine," I said, surprising myself. "1 coffee. And you're paying." That coffee turned into a walk through Morningside Park. The walk turned into him walking me to my shared apartment, a cramped, roach-infested walk-up on 110th Street that I was too ashamed to let him see past the front door. I said goodbye on the stoop, expecting that to be the end of it. A rich boy's momentary fascination with the gritty girl from the wrong side of the tracks. But Michael Harrington was persistent. He started showing up at the coffee shop, sitting in the corner with his laptop, nursing a single latte for hours. He'd wait until my shift ended and then offer to walk me home. He'd ask me questions, not about Flint, not about my family, but about what I thought. About political theory, about economic models, about a book I'd mentioned I was reading. He listened. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone was listening not because they had to, but because they genuinely wanted to hear what I had to say. He came from a world so foreign to me it might as well have been Narnia. His father, Richard Harrington, was a managing partner at one of the most powerful hedge funds in Manhattan. His mother, Victoria, was a socialite from a prominent Boston family. They had a townhouse on the Upper East Side, a cottage in the Hamptons that was bigger than my entire trailer park, and a legacy of alumni at Columbia that stretched back 4 generations. Michael was the youngest of 3. His older brother, William, was a rising star in the family business. His sister, Elizabeth, was a curator at the Met, married to a French count or something equally ridiculous. Michael, however, was the black sheep. He'd taken a few years off after high school to travel, to find himself, which his family considered a frivolous and slightly embarrassing indulgence. He was now back, finishing his degree in international relations, with vague plans to go into nonprofit work or impact investing. His family, I would learn, was less than thrilled about these plans. and they were going to be even less thrilled about me. We started dating slowly, cautiously. I kept him at arm's length for months, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was waiting for the moment he'd reveal himself to be like all the others, someone who saw me as a project, a sociological curiosity to be experienced and then discarded. But he never did. He was patient. He was kind. And against every single logical, self-protective bone in my body, I fell for him. I fell for the way he'd bring me coffee in the library, knowing exactly how I took it, black, no sugar, the same way I'd been drinking it since I was 16 because sugar was an expense. I fell for the way he'd hold my hand under the table when we were with his friends, a silent signal that I was with him, not just a guest. I fell for the way he looked at me, like I was the most fascinating, intelligent, beautiful woman he'd ever met. Our worlds began to collide in ways that were both exhilarating and terrifying. He wanted to meet my family. I resisted for as long as I could, but eventually, over spring break, we drove the 10 hours from New York to Flint. It was worse than I imagined. The trailer looked smaller, more dilapidated than I remembered. My father was in one of his dry phases, which meant he was sullen and silent instead of belligerent. He shook Michael's hand with a limp, resentful grip, muttered something about city boys, and retreated to his recliner. My mother, Ellen, was flustered. She had cleaned the trailer from top to bottom, but no amount of scrubbing could hide the stained carpet, the leaky faucet, the thin walls. She had made a pot roast, stretching the meager meat with extra potatoes and carrots. She kept apologizing for the food, for the house, for everything, while Michael smiled warmly and told her it was the best meal he'd had in years. Chloe, my ghost of a sister, barely said 2 words. But Lily, my firecracker, was in full force. She was 16 now, all sharp angles and even sharper opinions. She sat across from Michael at the small, wobbly kitchen table, her eyes narrowed. So, she said, her voice dripping with a cynicism that was far too old for her. "What's your angle?" "Lily," my mother and I said in unison. Michael just laughed. "No angle. I like your sister." "Why?" Lily pressed. "You've got your whole life in New York. Rich family. Good future." What's she got? A scholarship, a chip on her shoulder, and a family that's one medical bill away from being on the street. The table went silent. I felt my face burn with shame and rage. But Michael didn't flinch. He looked at Lily with a serious expression. "She's got the most brilliant mind I've ever met," he said quietly. "She's got a work ethic that would make a machine feel inadequate. And she's got a family that, despite everything, raised a daughter who got herself a full ride to Columbia. That's not nothing. That's everything." Lily stared at him for a long moment. Then, for the first time that night, a small, genuine smile touched her lips. "Okay," she said. "Maybe you're not a total douche." "Lily," my mother shrieked. Michael roared with laughter, and somehow, in that moment, the tension broke. My mother started laughing, then Chloe giggled, and even I cracked a smile. I caught my father's eye from the living room. He was watching, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. For a second, I thought I saw a glimmer of pride in his eyes. Or maybe it was just the light from the TV. That night, we slept in my old room. The twin bed was too small for both of us, so Michael slept on the floor on a pile of blankets, his long frame barely fitting. I lay in my bed, listening to the familiar sounds of the trailer, the creak of the furnace, the whistle of the wind through the thin walls, the distant sound of a train on the tracks. "Sam," Michael whispered in the darkness. "Yeah, your mom is amazing." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Yeah, she is. And your sisters. They're great. Especially Lily. She's a handful. She's a warrior. Like you." I didn't say anything. I just stared at the ceiling, at the water stain that had been there since I was a child, and I let the tears fall silently down my cheeks. No one had ever called me a warrior before. They'd called me stubborn, prickly, difficult, cold. But not a warrior. Michael reached up from the floor and found my hand. He held it, his thumb rubbing circles on my palm, until I fell asleep. After graduation, I got a job as a junior analyst at a boutique investment bank. It wasn't the hedge fund world Michael's family inhabited, but it was a start. Michael, true to his word, took a position at a nonprofit that focused on economic development in underserved communities. His family, especially his father, was apoplectic. A Harrington working for a nonprofit? It was a scandal. Our relationship deepened. We moved into a small, ridiculously overpriced one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. For me, it was a palace. For him, it was a charmingly bohemian sacrifice. We built a life. We had our routines: Sunday morning farmers markets, Friday night takeout from the Thai place on the corner, long walks across the Brooklyn Bridge. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to believe that I could be happy. That I could have both the ambition and the love. But the cracks were already there, hairline fractures in the foundation that I was too busy trying to build my empire to see. The first major crack was his family. I met them for the first time at a dinner at their Upper East Side townhouse. I wore the most expensive dress I owned, a black Calvin Klein shift I'd bought at a sample sale for $150, which was more than I'd ever spent on a single item of clothing. I had agonized over it for weeks. Victoria Harrington greeted me at the door with a smile that was all ice and no warmth. "Samantha," she said, her eyes sweeping over me from head to toe, cataloging every perceived deficiency. "How lovely to finally meet you." Richard Harrington barely looked up from his Wall Street Journal. The Flint girl," he said, as if that was my entire identity. The dinner was a masterclass in passive-aggressive condescension. William, the golden child, talked about a new fund he was launching. Elizabeth, the curator, talked about an upcoming gala. They discussed people I'd never heard of, places I'd never been, a world I had no entry into. They asked me about my job, and when I explained what I did, Richard snorted. "Boutique," he said, the word dripping with disdain. "That's a quaint term for it." Michael squeezed my hand under the table, but I was too proud to let him fight my battles. I smiled, nodded, and matched them point for point. I talked about my thesis on municipal bond defaults, about the economic impact of deindustrialization in the Rust Belt, about the structural inequalities embedded in the tax code. I didn't back down. I saw a flicker of surprise in Richard's eyes, a grudging respect. But it was quickly replaced by a cold calculation. After dinner, Victoria cornered me in the powder room. "You're very ambitious, Samantha," she said, reapplying her lipstick in the mirror. "I admire that. But ambition can be a dangerous thing. It can make people forget their place." I met her gaze in the mirror. "I've never forgotten my place, Mrs. Harrington. I've just decided it's not where I'm going to stay." She smiled thinly. "We'll see." The second crack was Michael himself. As his family's disapproval grew, so did his insecurity. He started staying later at work, getting involved in more projects. The nonprofit was struggling with funding, and he was taking it personally. He'd come home exhausted, irritable, and distant. When I got promoted to associate, outpacing several of my Ivy League colleagues, he was happy for me. He said he was. But I could see the way his jaw tightened when I talked about my day. I could feel the tension when I'd come home late after a successful deal, buzzing with adrenaline, and he'd be sitting in the dark, nursing a glass of whiskey. "I don't know why you do this to yourself," he said one night, after I'd worked 18 hours straight. "Do what?" "My job. Push so hard. You've made it. You're successful. You don't have to prove anything anymore." I looked at him, a wave of disbelief washing over me. "You don't get it," I said, my voice tight. "You've never had to prove anything. Your name was your ticket. My name, my face, my accent, they're all obstacles. Every day I have to be twice as good, work twice as hard, just to be considered half as competent. You don't get to tell me when I've done enough." "I'm not telling you that," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I'm just saying, there's more to life than work. There's us." "There's no us if I'm back in Flint," I snapped. "There's no us if I can't support myself, my mother, my sisters. You don't understand what's at stake for me." "Maybe you're right," he said quietly. "Maybe I don't. But maybe you don't understand that for me. You're what's at stake. And I'm losing you to a spreadsheet." We didn't talk for the rest of the night. We lay in bed, back to back, the space between us feeling like an ocean. The final crack was the proposal. He did it on the roof of our apartment building under the twinkling lights of the Brooklyn skyline. It was beautiful. He was beautiful. The ring was a simple, elegant diamond, classic, he said, like me. I said yes. For a moment, I was happy. Truly, uncomplicatedly happy. I called my mother first. She cried. Then she said, "Be careful, Sam. That world, it eats people like us." I dismissed her concern. I was smarter. I was stronger. I had fought my way into this world, and I was going to make it my own. But the wedding planning was a battleground. Victoria Harrington wanted a grand affair at the Metropolitan Club. I wanted something small, intimate, maybe at a restaurant in Brooklyn. Michael was caught in the middle, trying to appease everyone, pleasing no one. "Can't you just compromise?" he asked me one night, after a particularly brutal phone call with his mother. Compromise. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. I've been compromising my whole life. I compromised my childhood so I could get good grades. I compromised my social life so I could work 3 jobs. I compromised my pride every time I had to ask for financial aid. And now I have to compromise my wedding so your mother doesn't feel embarrassed in front of her friends. It's not about that, he said, his voice strained. Then what is it about? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I'm being asked to contort myself into a shape that fits into your world, and I'm getting tired of bending. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Resentment. "You know," he said slowly, "for someone who talks so much about not wanting to be defined by her past, you sure do bring it up a lot. You wield it like a weapon." "It's not a weapon. It's the truth. It's a shield," he countered. "You use it to keep everyone at a distance. You use it to make sure you never have to be vulnerable. You use it to make sure you're always the one who's right, the one who's been wronged, the one who's the victim." His words hit me like a slap in the face. I opened my mouth to fire back, to launch into a tirade about privilege and blindness and all the ways he would never, ever understand. But something stopped me. Because in his eyes, I didn't see anger. I saw exhaustion. I saw sadness. I saw a man who loved me but was tired of fighting. "I'm not a victim," I whispered. "I know you're not," he said. "You're the strongest person I've ever met. But Sam, sometimes you don't have to be strong with me. Sometimes you can just be. And I need you to let me in. Not as a project, not as an adversary, but as your partner. Can you do that?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to drop the walls, to let him in, to be the soft, loving partner he deserved. But I didn't know how. I had spent so long building those walls, brick by brick, that I had forgotten there was anything behind them but ambition and fear. I didn't answer him. And in my silence, something between us broke. We went through with the wedding. It was a compromise, a smaller affair than his mother wanted, but bigger than I wanted, held at a gallery in Chelsea. My family came. My mother looked beautiful in a new dress I'd bought for her. Lily, now in college herself, was my maid of honor. Chloe, now a nurse, stood by her side. My father came. He was sober. He stood in the back, hands in his pockets, watching. He didn't say much, but when he hugged me after the ceremony, he held on a little longer than usual. "You did good, Sammy," he mumbled into my hair. "You got out." I looked over at Michael, standing with his family, being congratulated by a sea of people in expensive suits and gowns. He caught my eye and smiled. It was a tired smile, but a genuine one. For a moment, I thought we could make it work. I thought love, real love, could bridge any gap. I was wrong. The marriage started to unravel almost immediately. It wasn't one big thing. It was 1,000 small cuts. It was his mother sending me helpful articles on how to be a proper hostess for corporate dinners. It was Michael coming home late, not from work, but from bars with his old college friends, the ones who still talked about their ski chalets in Aspen and their yachts in Nantucket. When I asked him about it, he'd shrug and say, "I just needed to decompress." "You're always working." It was the subtle shift in our finances. My money went into a joint account. His stayed in accounts I didn't have access to, managed by his family's financial advisor. When I questioned it, he said, "It's just the way things are done, Sam. Don't make it a thing." It was the way he started introducing me. "This is my wife, Samantha. She's from Michigan." Not, she's an analyst at a top firm. Not, she graduated summa cum laude from Columbia. Just from Michigan, as if that was the most interesting and only thing about me. The breaking point came a year and a half into the marriage. I had just been offered a major promotion. Vice president. I would be the youngest VP in the firm's history and one of the only women. It was everything I had worked for. I came home bursting with the news, ready to celebrate. Michael was in the living room, a glass of scotch in his hand, watching some documentary on TV. He looked up as I came in, but he didn't get up. "You're home early," he said. "I got the promotion," I said, trying to keep the excitement in my voice, trying to ignore his flat tone. He took a sip of his scotch. "That's great." "That's it?" "That's great." He set the glass down and turned to face me. "What do you want me to say, Sam? Congratulations? You've officially become more successful than me. More successful than my father probably ever thought you'd be. You've won." "Won?" I stared at him. "What are you talking about? This isn't a competition. Isn't it?" He stood up, and I could smell the whiskey on his breath. He'd had more than one. "Everything with you is a competition. A competition against my family, against my friends, against me. You're so obsessed with proving that you're better than all of us that you forgot how to be a wife. You forgot how to be a partner. You forgot how to be a person." His words were like acid, burning through the careful composure I had maintained for years. "How dare you," I said, my voice shaking. "How dare you stand there, in this apartment that I pay half for, with your trust fund and your family name, and tell me I'm the one who forgot how to be a person. You have no idea what it took for me to get here. You have no idea what I sacrificed." "I know what you sacrificed," he said, his voice rising. "You sacrificed us. You sacrificed any chance of happiness because you were too damn proud to let anyone help you. You were too busy fighting a war that ended the moment you said, 'I do.' The war never ends." I shouted, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. "Don't you get it? It never ends. For people like me, it never ends. Your mother will always see me as the Flint girl. Your father will always see me as a gold digger. Your friends will always see me as the charity case you married. And you, I choked on the words. "What about me?" he demanded. "You see me as a project," I whispered. "A challenge. A way to rebel against your family. You never saw me. You saw a symbol." The silence that followed was deafening. He stared at me, his face pale, his eyes wide. I could see the shock in them, the hurt. And for a moment, I wished I could take it back. I wished I could swallow the words, unsay them. But they were out there, hanging in the air between us, the ugly truth I had been carrying for so long. He didn't say anything. He just picked up his glass, walked into the bedroom, and closed the door. I slept on the couch that night, and the next night, and the night after that. We tried counseling. A polished woman in a midtown office who listened to us talk in circles for 6 weeks. Michael talked about my walls, my ambition, my refusal to be vulnerable. I talked about his privilege, his family, his inability to understand the fundamental power imbalance in our relationship. The counselor would nod sympathetically and suggest we try to see things from each other's perspective. But we couldn't. Or maybe we didn't want to. The final conversation happened on a Sunday afternoon, 3 months after the promotion fight. It was raining, a gray, dreary New York rain that seemed to wash the color out of everything. We were standing in the living room, boxes half-packed around us. I was moving out. I had found a studio apartment in the East Village, small and bare, but mine. "You don't have to do this," Michael said, his voice hollow. "Yes, I do. We could try again. We could, I don't know, start over. Somewhere else. Not here. Not New York." I shook my head. Running away isn't starting over. It's just running. He took a step toward me, and for a second, I saw the man I fell in love with. The man who listened to me in the coffee shop. The man who held my hand in the dark in Flint. The man who said I was a warrior. "I loved you," he said, his voice cracking. "I loved you more than I've ever loved anything. But you wouldn't let me. You wouldn't let anyone." I looked at him, and for the first time, I let the tears fall without trying to stop them. "I loved you too," I said. But love isn't enough. Not when the worlds we come from are so far apart that we can't even see each other. He didn't try to stop me when I picked up my suitcase and walked out the door. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. It was civil, efficient, and utterly devastating. His family's lawyers handled most of it. I kept my money, my job, my studio apartment. I kept my name. I didn't ask for anything else. I threw myself into work with a vengeance. I became a machine. I was the first one in the office and the last one to leave. I took on the toughest deals, the most complex cases. I was promoted again, then again. I was a managing director by the time I was 32. I had the corner office with a view of the Hudson River. I had the expensive suits and the designer handbag. I had the apartment in the East Village that I'd upgraded to a loft in Soho. I had everything I had ever wanted. And I was hollow. My mother would call, her voice full of gentle concern. "Are you happy, Sam?" "I'm successful," I'd say. "That's not what I asked." "It's the same thing." She'd sigh, and we'd talk about Chloe's new job or Lily's latest boyfriend. She never pushed. She never said, "I told you so." She just loved me, patiently, from a distance, waiting for me to figure it out on my own. My father died 2 years after the divorce. Liver failure. I flew back to Flint for the funeral. It was a small service at a rundown funeral home. A few old coworkers from the plant showed up. A couple of neighbors. My mother sat in the front row, dry-eyed, her hands folded in her lap. She looked smaller than I remembered, frilier. After the service, we stood in the cemetery, the cold Michigan wind whipping through the bare trees. "He was proud of you, you know," my mother said, looking at the casket. I snorted. "He never said it. He didn't know how. But he watched you. Every time you got a promotion, he'd read the email you sent us over and over. He'd show it to the cashier at the grocery store. 'My daughter,' he'd say. 'She's somebody.'" I felt the familiar sting of tears, but I blinked them back. "I'm sorry I didn't come back more." My mother finally looked at me. Her eyes were the same pale blue as mine, faded now with age, but just as sharp. "Don't apologize to me. Apologize to yourself. You've been running for so long, Sam. Maybe it's time to stop." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her that running was the only thing that had ever worked. But standing there, in the dirt of my hometown, next to my father's grave, I didn't have the energy. For the first time in my life, I didn't have an answer. The months after my father's death were strange. I found myself calling my mother more often, not just for the weekly check-in, but to hear her voice. I started thinking about Flint in a way I hadn't since I left, not with shame, but with a strange, aching nostalgia. I remembered the way the streetlights looked on snowy nights, the smell of my mother's pot roast, the sound of Lily's laughter before she learned to be angry. I also started to notice the cracks in my perfect, successful life. The corner office was cold. The designer handbag was just a bag. The loft in Soho was silent at night, and I'd lie in bed, staring at the exposed brick walls, wondering what the point of it all was. I had proven them all wrong. I had made it. I was somebody. But I was somebody alone. I started going to therapy. Not the corporate-mandated kind, but a real therapist, a woman named Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, who had an office in Harlem and a no-nonsense way of cutting through my defenses. "You talk about success like it's a destination," she said in our third session. "Like you get there and then you're done. But what if success is just a way of running?" "What are you running from, Samantha?" "I'm not running," I said automatically. "I'm building." "Building what? A life? Or a fortress?" I didn't have an answer. I sat in silence for a long time, and for once, I didn't fill it with words. "You grew up feeling invisible," Dr. Okonkwo continued. "So you decided to become so visible, so undeniable, that no one could ever ignore you again. But you forgot that visibility isn't the same as being seen. And you forgot that the person who needed to see you most was yourself." That session broke something open in me. I cried in her office, ugly, heaving sobs that I hadn't let out since I was a child. I cried for the little girl who had to be perfect because her father was a drunk and her mother was exhausted. I cried for the teenager who hid her free lunch behind her textbooks. I cried for the woman who had married a man she loved but couldn't let love her back. When I left her office that day, I felt lighter. Not fixed, but lighter. And I knew, for the first time, that the wall I had built wasn't protecting me. It was imprisoning me. A year later, I got a call from Lily. "Sam," she said, her voice strained. "It's Mom." My mother had been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer. The prognosis was good, they'd caught it early, but she needed surgery and treatment. And she needed help. I didn't hesitate. I took a leave of absence from work, something the old Sam would never have done, and flew to Flint. The trailer looked the same, but my mother looked older. The cancer had already taken a toll, and she was thin, her hair starting to thin from the chemo. But her eyes were still sharp, and when she saw me at the door, she smiled. "You didn't have to come," she said. "Yes, I did." I stayed for 3 months. I took her to appointments, made her soup, sat with her during the long, quiet afternoons when the nausea was bad. Chloe came when she could, driving up from Detroit on weekends. Lily, who had moved to Chicago for work, flew in once a month. It was the longest I had spent in Flint since I left for college. At first, it felt like a step backward. I was sleeping in my old room, in my old bed, listening to the same sounds that had haunted my childhood. But slowly, something shifted. I started talking to my mother. Not the quick, functional conversations we'd had for years, but real conversations. I told her about my fears, my loneliness, my doubts. I told her about the divorce, not just the facts, but the feelings. I told her about the night Michael said I used my past as a shield. He was right, I admitted one afternoon, sitting on the edge of her bed while she rested. I did. I still do. My mother reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were cold, her skin paper thin. "You learned that from me," she said quietly. I stared at her. "What?" "I taught you to be strong. I taught you to never let anyone see you cry. I taught you that the only way to survive was to build walls. I was trying to protect you, Sam. But maybe I protected you so much that I forgot to teach you how to let people in." I shook my head. "You did everything for us. You worked yourself to the bone." "I did," she said. "And I'm proud of what I did. But I also made you believe that love was a weakness. That needing someone was a failure. I see that now. And I'm sorry." I held her hand and cried. And for the first time, I let her see me cry. After my mother recovered, I went back to New York. But I was different. I went back to work, but I set boundaries. I stopped working weekends. I started taking vacations. I reconnected with old friends I had pushed away. And I started to think about Michael. I didn't know what had become of him. After the divorce, we had cut all contact. I had heard through the grapevine that he had left the nonprofit and gone to work for his father's firm, the thing he had always resisted. I assumed he had finally given in, become the Harrington heir he was always meant to be. I was wrong. A mutual friend from Colombia, a woman named Xuna, mentioned him casually over drinks one night. "Did you hear about Michael?" she asked. My heart did a strange little flip. "No. What about him?" "He left the hedge fund. Started his own thing. Some kind of social enterprise that does microlending in struggling cities. I think he's based in Detroit now." Detroit. 2 hours from Flint. I didn't say anything, but the name stayed with me. Detroit. He had gone back to the Rust Belt. He had gone to the kind of place I had spent my whole life trying to escape. A few weeks later, I was in Chicago for a conference. On a whim, I rented a car and drove to Detroit. I told myself I was just curious. I told myself I wanted to see what he was doing, to see if he had actually followed through on his old ideals. I found his office in a renovated warehouse in a part of the city that was slowly coming back to life. It was a small space, open and airy, with a handful of young people working at computers. And there, at a desk in the corner, was Michael. He looked different. Older. Thinner. His hair was shorter, and there was a seriousness to his face that hadn't been there before. He was frowning at a spreadsheet, running a hand through his hair in that familiar way. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, my heart pounding. Then I knocked on the open door. He looked up. His eyes widened. For a second, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Sam?" "Hi, Michael." He stood up slowly, pushing his chair back. "What are you doing here?" "I heard about your project. I was in Chicago, so I thought I'd see for myself." He stared at me for a moment, then a slow, cautious smile spread across his face. You drove from Chicago to Detroit to see my little operation? I was curious. He laughed, a real laugh, the kind I hadn't heard in years. Well, come in. I'll give you the tour. The tour took an hour. He showed me everything, the loan programs, the community partnerships, the small businesses they'd helped start. He talked with a passion I hadn't seen since our college days, and I realized that he had finally found his path. Not his father's path, not the path of rebellion, but his own. After the tour, we went to a coffee shop down the street. We sat at a small table by the window, the afternoon light falling across the worn wooden floor. So, I said, wrapping my hands around my cup, you left the hedge fund. I did. About 2 years ago. I realized I was becoming my father. And that's not who I wanted to be. I nodded slowly. I heard about your mother. I'm sorry. His mother, Victoria, had died of a sudden heart attack the year before. I had seen the obituary in the Times. Thank you, he said. It was hard. But it also made me think. About what I was doing with my life. About what mattered. He looked at me, his blue eyes steady. I thought about you a lot, Sam. My breath caught. You did? Yeah. I thought about that night, the night you left. You said I saw you as a symbol. A project. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. Wondering if you were right. Were you? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He was quiet for a moment. I think we both saw symbols. I saw you as this perfect representation of everything my family wasn't real, authentic, unbreakable. And you saw me as everything you were fighting against. We were so busy looking at what the other person represented that we forgot to see the actual person. I felt tears prick at my eyes. I've been in therapy, I said, surprising myself. I've been learning about my walls. About why I couldn't let you in. He reached across the table and took my hand. His hand was warm, calloused in a way it hadn't been before from work, from building something with his own hands. I'm not the same person I was, Sam, he said. I'm not trying to save anyone. I'm not trying to prove anything to my family. I'm just trying to build something real. Here. In this city that everyone gave up on. I looked at our hands, intertwined on the scarred wooden table. I'm not the same either, I said. I don't need to prove anything anymore. I've already proven it. And I've realized that proving myself doesn't fill the empty spaces. He squeezed my hand. I'm not asking for anything, Sam. I'm glad you came. I stayed in Detroit for 2 days. We talked for hours about the past, about our regrets, about the people we had become. We walked through the city, through neighborhoods that were being rebuilt and neighborhoods that were still crumbling. He showed me a community garden that his organization had helped fund, a row of small storefronts that had once been abandoned and were now bustling with life. On the second night, we stood on the roof of his building, looking out at the Detroit skyline. The lights of the city glittered in the darkness, not as bright as New York, but steadier somehow. More real. You know, Michael said, leaning against the railing. When I first came here, everyone told me I was crazy. Detroit? It's a wasteland. There's nothing there. But that's not true. There's everything there. There's people who never gave up. There's a history, a soul. It just needs someone to believe in it. I smiled. You always did have a savior complex. He laughed. Maybe. But I'm learning the difference between saving and helping. Between seeing a symbol and seeing a person. He turned to face me. The moonlight caught his face, softening the hard edges. I'm not asking you to move here, he said. I'm not asking for anything. But I want you to know that I still love you. Not the symbol. Not the idea. You. Samantha Keller from Flint, Michigan. The girl who was born barefoot on broken glass and built herself into the sky. I felt the tears slide down my cheeks and I didn't wipe them away. I love you too, I said. I think I always did. I just didn't know how to let myself. He stepped closer, his hands coming up to cut my face. His thumbs brushed away my tears. We have time, he said softly. We can learn. I didn't move to Detroit right away. I went back to New York, but I started spending weekends there. I cut back on my hours at the firm, transitioning to a part-time consulting role. I started to build a life that wasn't just work. Michael and I took it slow. We dated again, like we were starting over. We went to movies and dinners. We argued about politics and laughed about old times. We learned to be vulnerable with each other. We learned to see each other. 6 months later, I quit my job. I sold my loft in Soho and moved to Detroit. I joined Michael's organization, not as a figurehead, but as a financial strategist. I used my skills to help small business owners get loans, to help communities rebuild, to do work that mattered. My mother was thrilled. "You're finally home," she said when I told her. "I'm home," I agreed. And for the first time, I meant it. 2 years later, Michael and I got married again. It was a small ceremony in a renovated theater in Detroit, with our families and friends around us. My mother walked me down the aisle, healthy and strong, her hair grown back silver and beautiful. Lily was my matron of honor, and Chloe stood beside her, finally finding her voice. Even my father's memory was there, in the stories we told and the quiet pride I knew he would have felt. Michael's father, Richard, came. He was older now, softer. The loss of his wife and the passage of time had mellowed him. He shook my hand and said, "I was wrong about you, Samantha." "I'm sorry." I smiled and said, "I was wrong about some things too." That night, after the reception, Michael and I stood on the roof of our new house, a small, restored craftsman in a neighborhood that was coming back to life. The Detroit skyline stretched out before us, the lights of the city glittering in the darkness. "You know," Michael said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "My mother used to say that a person is born with two things, the dirt they come from and the sky they reach for." I laughed. "That sounds like something my mother would say." "Maybe all mothers say something like that," he said. "But I think they're wrong. I think you're born with dirt and you're born with sky, but the real work is learning that you don't have to choose. You can stand in the dirt and still touch the sky. And sometimes, the sky is only beautiful because of the dirt it rises from." I leaned back against him, feeling the warmth of his chest, the steadiness of his heartbeat. Below us, the city hummed with life, the sound of people rebuilding, of hope taking root in broken ground. I thought about the little girl in the trailer, who believed that the only way to survive was to escape. I thought about the young woman who built walls of achievement so high that she trapped herself inside. I thought about the years I spent running, the years I spent alone, the years I spent learning that success without love is just another kind of emptiness. And I thought about now. About this moment. About the man who held me and the life we were building, brick by brick, in a city that everyone else had given up on. My mother was right about one thing: we are born with dirt and sky. But she forgot to mention the most important part. The dirt is not something to escape. It's the foundation. And the sky is not something to conquer. It's the possibility. The real work, the hard work, the meaningful work, is learning to stand with your feet in the dirt and your eyes on the sky, and to build something beautiful in the space between. I closed my eyes and let the night air wash over me. The stars were out, bright and clear, the kind of stars you could only see when you were far enough from the city lights. Or close enough to the ground. "I love you," Michael whispered in my ear. "I love you too," I said. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to build anything more. I just let myself be. Standing in the dirt, reaching for the sky, and finally home.